Welcome back to Science or Spirituality, or as I call it, Sci-Spy. It is episode number 4, and I'm not going to lie, this is probably the most difficult one I've ever done. So we've covered in the previous episodes breathwork, self-compassion, a cosmic perspective. But today, we are going somewhere that might make you feel a little uncomfortable. That's okay. Sometimes the most valuable insights come from being willing to sit with a little bit of discomfort. So here's a statement. The self is an illusion created by the brain. And again, before we react, before we think, wait, what? Just sit with that for a second. The self is an illusion created by the brain. And what comes up as a response? What does it mean? Does that sound like philosophy, neuroscience, crazy? Or does it sound true? Again, I'll reflect on the time when I understood or started to play with this idea. It was when I was reading a book on meditation. And in it said, look for the self. And I started looking. So I started to see my own shadow, my own body. And it asked, where is it? Can you find it? And I thought, what do you mean? Where is it? I'm right here. It's me, obviously. But then I actually tried to go a little deeper, and I sat down and started to look. So if this is me, I looked at the thing that's me. And the more I looked, the less I could find. There were thoughts, but I could watch those thoughts. So I wasn't the thoughts. There were feelings. Those changed constantly. So I wasn't the feelings either. There was a body, but my body is also constantly changing. And I can observe it. So I wasn't exactly the body either. And I had this disturbing moment of, who's doing the looking then? And if I ask that question, who's asking it? Is mind-boggling, and it's looking down and realizing you're standing on nothing. And that's fascinating. Around the same time, I was reading books about neuroscience and research saying they're essentially similar things. There's no self-center in the brain. There's no homunculus or a little person inside your head watching and controlling as you would believe in the movie Inside Out. The self is a construct, a story, a useful fiction. So both introspection and science started to point at the same bizarre conclusion. The thing you might think you are most fundamentally yourself might not be what you think it is. So take a breath. Let's ride this together. So let us look at the complex and the easy misunderstandings. There's a right way and a wrong way to work with this inside. So let's look at the spiritual perspective first. In Buddhist texts, the Buddha taught Anatta, or no self. He wasn't teaching nihilism though. He wasn't saying nothing exists or nothing matters. He was pointing to the specific something. So let's try this right now. Can you close your eyes for a moment and try to find the self? Where is it? You might say, I'm the one thinking. Okay, watch your thoughts for a moment. Thoughts arise, thoughts pass. You're observing them. So if you can observe the thoughts, are you the thoughts? Or are you the observer? Okay, I'm the observer then. But can you observe the observer? When you turn attention back on itself, is there a solid thing there? Or just more process, more awareness, but no fixed point you can identify as self? You might say, I'm my body. But as you know, your body is constantly changing. The way you look, feel, constantly changes. The cells are different than they were 7 years ago, all of them. You were a child once, now you're not. Or maybe you still are. Your body was different. Are you the same self you were as a child? In some sense, yes. In a lot of sense, no. So you might say, I'm my personality. But personality changes. You're different around different people. Your traits shift over time. Which personality is the real you? And what the Buddha observed is this. Anywhere you look, you find process, not entity. Thoughts arising and passing. Feelings arising and passing. Sensations coming and going. Patterns of behavior. But patterns that change. There's no solid, permanent, unchanging thing you can point to and say, that's me. Now, this does not mean there is no experience here. There's awareness, there's life happening. But the separate, isolated, permanent self, that we have to kind of conclude is fiction. A useful fiction for navigating the world, but not ultimately real. Now, this freedom is profound. If there is no fixed self, then we are not trapped. You can change, you can grow. The story you tell about who you are, that's just a story. You can write a different one. The suffering this addresses is also profound. Most of our suffering comes from defending and maintaining an identity of the self. I am not good enough. I'm a failure. I'm better than them. I need to do this way. All of that is protecting our illusory self. And when we see this illusion, not intellectually, but experientially, it's a tremendous relief. You're still here, living life, but without the constant burden of maintaining and defending an identity. There's this Zen saying, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The actions don't change. What changes is there is no one taking them personally. Now that was a look into a little bit of the spiritual perspective, but now let's look at some of the scientific aspects of what we have discovered about this. And it's remarkably consistent. First of all, there is no self-center in the brain, and this is very extensively mapped out There's no single location where you, quote unquote, reside. Instead, there are networks. What we sometimes misunderstand as is what the scientists call the default mode network, so the DMN. And this is where the self-referential thinking happens. So if you are sitting and ruminating, this is where the default mode network is on. The salience network for attention, the executive control network for decision making. These networks interact with each other, and out of that interaction emerges this grand vision of the self, but it's an emergent property. It was not there, it just emerged out of these interactions. It's not local, it's not specific. And the second, the self is constructed by moment interactions. Your brain takes all the sensory information and it starts to predict the movement for the next second, the next moment. The sensory information, memory, bodily states, and constructs a model of you. This happens constantly in real time. Then you think, what am I? The you that exists right now is different from the you that existed just before you started this podcast. Because different information is being integrated. This is why memory is so important to identity. And people lose memory, like in cases of advanced Alzheimer's. They lose their sense of self. The self is partly a narrative, a story told about the past and projected into the future. And without this narrative, the sense of continuous identity dissolves. Thirdly, the self is more like a process than a thing. And some neuroscientists call this term selfing, the process of creating a sense of self. It's a verb, not a noun. The brain is constantly, quote unquote, selfing, not to be confused by selfie, which is a fun thing to do. Selfing is a moment by moment change. Evidence for this comes from many places though. Split brain research show that you can have two selves in one brain. Which one is real? The question doesn't make sense because neither is an entity. They're both processes. And brain damage can actually completely change personalities. The famous case in neuroscience, Phineas Gage, the famous railroad worker whose frontal lobe changed him from responsible, mild-mannered, or impulsive to impulsive and aggressive when a railroad spike went through his face. So which one is his true self? Both? Neither? And research on free will showed that the brain initiates actions before conscious awareness. Now this is interesting. The brain initiates action before you are aware of it. We think we are deciding, but the decision is already underway before we know it. So who's deciding? So explanations of this sort for behavior confabulate. We make up these things. The brain creates a narrative that makes sense of actions after the fact. And we believe the narrative is the truth, but often it's not. We are unreliable narrators of our own lives. Now we talked about the default mode network, the active part of the brain which is usually active when you are not doing anything. When people meditate, especially in states of deep absorption, activity in this area, the default mode network, decreases. And when DMN activity decreases, the sense of self decreases. People report feeling selfless or boundless. And this isn't anything pathological. It is often described as blissful. The self is revealed as optional. So, science is saying the self is not an entity residing in the brain. It's a construction, it's a process, it's a model, useful for functioning in the world, but not ultimately real in the way we usually think it is. Now, where do they meet? Where do the spiritual and the science meet is the beautiful and slightly terrifying convergence, though. Both meditation and neuroscience are showing that the self is not what we think it is. A meditator sits still for thousands of hours looking inward and reports, I can't find a self, there's no experience, no experiencer, there is process, no entity. And the scientist scans the brain, studies patients with brain difficulties or damages, runs experiments and reports there's no self-center. The self is a construct, a model, an emergent process. They're describing the same thing again. So the mechanisms the scientists have found, the DMN, the constructive nature of experience, the confabulation, the malleability of identity, that explains why meditation reveals what it reveals. And the meditation reveals experientially what science discovers empirically. Neither is saying you don't exist. You clearly do. You're having experiences, making choices, living a life. What they're saying is you exist, but not as a fixed, independent, unchanging entity. A process in the universe. Some people say, as we discussed last time, you are kind of the universe, not a separate thing from it. If all of this is overwhelming, I know it can be challenging to hear all this. Liberating oneself from ourselves. But when we think about it, when we meditate on it, this challenge becomes less of a problem. It becomes a state for more discovery, insights. But there is a practical element to this too. The story you tell yourself about who you are, that's just a story. You can change it. You're not your past. And you're not your failures. You're not your thoughts. You're not your successes. You're not your personality traits, which we have started to attach ourselves in this day and age a lot. Those are all patterns, and patterns can change. But there is responsibility. Just because there is no fixed self doesn't mean actions don't have certain consequences in the material living world. You still have to live ethically, care for others, make good choices for your family and friends. The difference, you're doing it without the burden of a permanent identity that needs defending all the time. Okay, we've done a lot of conceptual gymnastics. Let's make this a little practical. So how do you work with this insight without slipping into nihilism or paralysis? Let's go. Practice 1. Self-inquiry meditation. I invite you to sit comfortably right now. And this is a practice from Advaita Vedanta, refined over centuries. So find a quiet place, sitting comfortably. Take a few deep breaths. Slow yourself down to this moment. Arrive in stillness. Notice your breath. And then ask yourself this question: who am I? Don't answer intellectually. Just look. Who am I? Where is this I? Who is this? Who is this? Who is having this experience? A thought may arise. I am Nikhil. I am this, that, the other. Notice, that's a thought. Who is aware of that thought? I am my body. Notice, you are aware of your body. So if you are aware of the body, aren't you the awareness? Maybe there is, I am my thoughts and emotions and feelings. Noticing thoughts coming and going. You observe them. So, are you the thought or the observer, or both, or neither? You may say, I am the observer. Now look for the observer. Where is it? Can you find it? Or do you just find more awareness? Keep asking, who am I? Keep looking. Not to find an answer, but to notice. Notice what happens when you look. For most people, there's an initial, of course, I'm me. Then there's confusion. Wait, where am I exactly? And there is sometimes a gap, a spaciousness, a sense of awareness without a clear center. And go in gently with these practices. Don't expect fireworks. This is a gradual process. But when you get to that state where you can start to notice no self, it is liberating, it is powerful, it is profound. So try this for yourself, pun intended. Ask the question, who am I? A couple of times a day. And if you really want to be funny and playful with this, do this with your friends and family. Practice number 2, noticing the self-talk. Throughout the day, catch yourself and your thinking. Catch yourself when you say, I am dash. And this is what I call eye-catching. I am angry. Notice anger is present. It's arising in this moment. But is it you? Or is it a temporary state you're experiencing right now? I'm a failure. Notice there are failure thoughts arising. There might be a pattern of behavior. But is that what you are fundamentally? Or is it a story being told? I am anxious, I am nervous. Notice anxiety sensations are present, but they are arising in awareness. Are you the anxiety or the awareness of the anxiety? And these practices are here to create space between awareness and the content of awareness. You're not denying or running away from the experience. You're noticing it slightly differently, experientially, and they are not identical to the awareness experiencing them. Again, just become an eye catcher. Whenever you see yourself, again, pun intended, I am dash. Just pause. Is that really what I am? Or is that a temporary state, a pattern, a story? And research shows this practice, called decentering, reduces emotional intensity, increases flexibility. You're less caught up in the problem and more solution oriented. You become less trapped, so you spend a lot of energy in finding solutions in moving forward. And this is wonderful practice. Practice number 3, the third person perspective. This is both a meditation technique and a moment to moment practice. So when you are in a stressful situation or identified too much with a problem, try this simple shift. Try to speak to yourself in a third person. So if you are feeling stressed, say this instead. Nikhil is feeling anxious about this chat. Instead of, I am anxious about this chat. It sounds weird at first, but research is clear and shows it works. It creates a healthy distance without dissociation. You're not denying the experience, you're just not over identifying with it. You can also do this as a meditation, so sitting quietly wherever you are and observe your experience while mentally narrating in the third person. Nikhil is sitting. There's breath happening. There's a thought about breakfast. There's a sensation in the back. This is not depersonalization, which is a pathological detachment from self. This is disidentification, a healthy recognition that you are the awareness of experience, not identical to the content of the experience. So try that a few times. Try to bring this third person viewpoint when you notice you're really caught up in identification. When you really believe you are your anxiety, your anger, your story. Step back. Narrate in the third person. Notice if there is more space, more freedom. And how do you keep track of all this? Pay attention to these things. When do you feel most identified? Just notice throughout the day, when do you feel most identified with certain things? Maybe when there is a conversation going, maybe someone is challenging you on your perspectives, most convinced you are, most solid you are, where you are. That is where you are most identified. When do you feel more spacious, aware of experience without being locked into an identity? So does identification increase suffering, or does some distance decrease it? Just pay attention. Are you taking things more or less personally? Do you feel trapped or more free? So the goal is not to achieve some special state. As always, whenever you feel like a self, the goal is to notice the self is something. And whenever you notice that self is something or solid in some moments and in transparency in other moments, and you have some influence on how you identify yourself, pun intended. So this practice can go wrong in a few ways, though. You just have to identify the common problems. Pitfall number 1, nihilism. We might end up asking ourselves, if there's no self, nothing matters, no experience matters. But experiences still happen, pain still hurts, love still matters, actions still have consequences. The absence of a fixed self doesn't mean nothing is real. It means reality is process, not entity. Pitfall number 2, we might get into spiritual bypassing or bypassing responsibility. If you have no self, so I'm not responsible for any actions, you still have to pay your bills, as I explained in the earlier section. After enlightenment, you still have to pay the bills, you still have to care for others, you still have to make ethical choices. The absence of a fixed self doesn't absolve us from responsibilities in common humanity. It just removes the ego around it, the drama around it. Another pitfall we may need to look out for is freezing or paralysis. If there's no chooser, how do I make choices? You still make choices, decisions still happen. The difference is you're not creating suffering for the decisions you have made, and suffering around the illusion that there's a separate, permanent you who needs to make the perfect choice for you. So choices arise from the totality of conditions. You participate in that process. Pitfall number 4, forcing it. Oh, very common. You can't think your way into this understanding. It's gradual. Sometimes it happens spontaneously, but it is not something you can force it. It's an experiential insight. Don't expect to participate in this episode and then suddenly wake up with no self-realizations. You have to train yourself or practice. This is why we are here, daily practice. The practices are the seeds. They grow slowly. So just be patient and just have trust, because there is something liberating about this. Pitfall number 5, we may be missing the point. The point of realizing no self is not to feel weird or detached or spacey. The point is to reduce suffering. If this insight increases your suffering, then you are doing it incorrectly. And I don't say this a lot, but it should create more freedom, more ease, more compassion. And maybe you're feeling an increase in suffering is because you still identify with certain concepts. So it's not that doing that will help you change everything in your life. It just highlights more important things in life. So the test of this insight is, does it make you kinder? Does it make you more effective? Does it reduce your suffering and the suffering you cause others? If yes, you're on the right track. If no, something has been misunderstood. And that's where you can pause. So here's what we have discovered today. The self is an illusion created by the brain. It's both ancient and modern. The meditator and the brain scientists are describing the same reality from different angles. You exist, you clearly have experiences, you're making choices, living a life, but you don't exist as a fixed entity. You're a process, a pattern, a story that's constantly changing, being written and rewritten. And recognizing that is profoundly liberating. You're not trapped in what you think, who you are. You're not your past mistakes. You're not your worst day. You're not even your personality traits. Those can change too. The story of you is fluid, and that means you have more freedom than you ever thought. But with that freedom comes responsibility. You still have to take care of yourself, others, other ethical choices. The difference is you're doing it without a constant burden of maintaining this illusory self. So pick one of these practices, try your self-inquiry meditation, notice your eyes or catch your eyes, or practice the third person perspective. Do it consistently, repeat it for as long as you need. Notice what happens, not what you think should happen, what actually happens. And let me say this. So far in this series, this has been the most deepest material we've covered. If it feels confusing or unsettling, it's normal. Sit with it. It could be part of your practice. Don't rush to conclusions. Let it percolate. Sometimes the most important insights take time to integrate. So far we've covered 4 episodes, 4 statements that usually blurs the line between science and spirituality, breath control, self-compassion, cosmic interconnection, the illusion of self. Different topics, but they all point to the same underlying truth. The reality is richer, stranger, and more interconnected than our usual way of thinking suggests. So the practice we've explored aren't just interesting ideas, they are technologies for transformation. Use them, test them, see what happens in your own experiences. That's what matters. Not what I say, not what researchers say, not what ancient teachers say. What happens when you actually practice? So, I'll leave you with this. Sit with this question, who am I? Not to find an answer, but to notice what happens. So thank you for being on this journey with me. Thank you for being curious enough, open enough, brave enough to explore these edges. The world needs more people willing to question their assumptions, to investigate reality directly, to integrate wisdom from multiple sources. So until next time, keep practicing, keep investigating, keep living these questions. And remember, you are not who you think you are. You are so much more than that. Thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, please shout. Until next time, take care.